Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very, very exciting episode of the Cucina, Aurora Kitchen Witchery podcast on another episode of Conversational Witchcraft. We have the amazing, incredible, I'm so excited. It's Storm Faerywolf who is here with us today. Storm is a published author, an experienced teacher, a visionary poet, and a professional warlock. Drawn to the occult at an early age, he went on to be trained and initiated into various streams of witchcraft, most notably the fairy tradition, where he holds a black wand of the master. He is a chancellor of the Modern Witch University, an online school offering spiritual and magical instruction, and a founding teacher of BlueRose, a course in practical folkloric witchcraft. He is the founder of BlueRose, a lineage of fairy tradition, as well as BlueLotus, his school of Reiki. His newest books include Betwixt Between, Forbidden Mysteries of Faery Witchcraft, The Witch's Name, and The Satyr's Kiss. He makes his home in San Francisco Bay Area with his loving partners and a menagerie of animals and plants. Storm, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you. For those of you listening, we have literally been chatting for like 15 minutes before we started recording because apparently we're best friends now. I don't know.
It's so awesome to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And it's already been fun. It's already been fun. We haven't even started.
I'm so happy to meet you. I was saying before we started that like I've talked to your partners and I feel like you and I have met before, but we're not sure that we have, but like, I don't know. I feel like I know you. Maybe it's because I stalk your animals on Facebook. I don't know.
Oh, there you go. There you go. We may have met at one of the temple fests, like in passing, but we're not sure. So maybe, I don't know.
So here we are. Are you from the West Coast originally?
Yes.
Or you are. So you grew up over there with the sun and beautifulness and no snow.
Yes. Yes, I have lived in the San Francisco Bay Area my entire life. I was born here and I've visited the snow on 2 occasions and that's enough. Thank you very much. That's just not in my blood. I'm gonna stay away from that snow. Snow for me is something you want to go and plan for. You want to go and visit it. And then as soon as you're done, you want to leave.
It's like in-laws.
It's like what? It's like what?
It's like in-laws.
They're exactly
right.
It's
right.
just like
except my in-laws are great, but like most people's in-laws.
Yeah, there you go.
You know, like
I hear you.
Right. Like it's like shitty ass family where you're like, I gotta plan it out. I gotta make sure.
I kind of feel like with in-laws, if they're visiting you, it's like the rule's like what, 3 days. With me, snow was like an afternoon. Like I got bored with it real quick. I was like, there's not much more I can do here.
The thing about right, listen, I have to say, like, I live in New Hampshire, right? And we moved from New York to New Hampshire, and everybody's like, "Why would you move to some place where there's more snow?" And I'm like, because I fucking hate the heat. I hate summer, right? I would rather be somewhere where we have an extended fall and an extended winter, and extended spring, and like summer is a blip, right? So right now, as we're recording this, it's like 110 degrees outside my window and my air conditioning is blasting and I'm wearing sweaters and I have blankets because I hate the heat. And I feel about heat and like beaches the way you feel about snow. Like I don't want to be in a bathing suit and I get super bored if I'm just sitting outside because you can't move when it's that hot.
Here's something too. This is how crazy I am. So obviously I've lived here my whole life. I said that, but I am not a beach person at all. No, I mean, look at this skin. This doesn't go outside. I don't go out in the sun. No, thank you.
Especially not now, right?
Especially, oh God.
Especially not now, not since COVID.
It's probably going to be about 100 degrees today, Fahrenheit, you know, where I live. And yesterday was about the same. And but again, air conditioning is blasting. And my temple space where I'm in is actually right next door to where the air conditioner unit is up in the attic. And so it gets cold in here. Yeah. Like I had to put on a hoodie and sweatpants yesterday. Everybody else is like hardly wearing anything in the house. And I'm like, oh, come into my refrigerator room, you know, and it's like, it's cold.
But do you love it though? I love it. Do you love it? And I realize being able to have air conditioning is a privilege and a blessing.
Absolutely.
We actually put the AC in our house like at the beginning of the pandemic, when we realized we might be stuck in this house for an extended period of time. We were like, we should invest some money in putting central air in, because we're going to be home a lot and we need to be comfortable. Where before we had like little window units, right? And often my partner and I are like, this was the best money we ever spent putting central air in that. And it's cold.
Hell yeah.
It's cold and I love it.
Difference. I grew up and we did not have air conditioning. And then I remember my grandmother got us one of those swamp coolers, the ones where it goes in the window, but you have to put water in it.
Yes.
And then of course, invariably they're going to get like moldy or something and it's gross.
Right. And then it's got that smell, that musty smell.
That musty smell.
It's gross.
But now it makes me think my grandma. So that's kind of nice now, but I don't have to deal with it in real life. So that's good. Right. But, oh my God, then moving here, I was like, oh yeah, it's this big air conditioner, whatever. Yeah. This is great. It's just, and then eventually we got solar panels.
Oh, that's great.
Oh yeah. Because that's I didn't want to pay $1,000 in a single month, for our electricity bill, which happened, back in the day. And I was like, it made me cry. It made me cry the first time.
Turn off all the lights. Oh my God. Okay. Yeah. So talk to me about growing up in this area. Like I've never been to San Francisco Bay Area. I have some friends that live out there besides you, because I'm considering you my new best friend. So deal with it. I just want to come hang out in your house with your plants and all the cool people that live there and your animals. Like that's life goals for me. But I do have other friends that live out in the Bay Area, and it's beautiful and it's super liberal and there's so much art and culture. And were you initially introduced to witchcraft and the occult because of where you grew up, or is that something you found on your own as you got older? Tell us about that.
Well, I think that a couple things. One is probably, I mean, it is kind of like, especially at the time, I'd like to think that I look younger than I am, so I grew up in the 70s. And
no, you didn't.
Yeah, I was born in 71. I'm 51.
I'm literally
and so it's the witchcraft. No,
it's the witchcraft. Thank you. I appreciate it's the witchcraft. I know. People think I'm younger than I am as well. I'm actually 104. Well, because it's the mileage. It's not the years, it's the mileage. So
I love it. That's awesome.
It's the truth.
But yeah, during the 70s, one of the big things was, of course, the psychic movement, and everyone was talking about telepathy and ESP and all this stuff. I remember the Time Life books on the occult and the paranormal. Yeah. And so I would find these things, like maybe we'd go to somebody's house, and I was such a book nerd, anyway. My mom always enrolled me in all these different book clubs when I was a kid. And I was reading before I went to kindergarten, because she took all the time. I was the first kid, so she had time with me. Right. I remember the little, it was like the play school magnetic, like schoolhouse with the letters, and she'd like teach me words and whatever. So then I was reading, and then we'd go to people's houses, and I would always, like, when the adults are doing their adult thing, I would just go over to the bookshelves and I'd be looking at bookshelves. And I remember finding like these Time Life books, and I was just happy as a clam over in the corner, like reading these books that were talking about like maybe, ghosts and, UFOs and psychic stuff and witches.
Right. Paranormal.
And I was so into witches. But it was really, and I know everybody groans when I say this, but it's the truth, really my first exposure to witchcraft as a concept was through reruns of Bewitched.
Oh, hell yes.
And I was 2 years old when I told my mom, I'm going to be a witch. And I'm sure she's just like, oh, that's great. Whatever, please clean your room, but that always stuck with me. And then, of course, the story is like, oh, witches, worship the devil, whatever. But I was like, well, Samantha Stevens doesn't. And I just was like, no, I'm just going to follow my own idea, of what this is. Mm-hmm. And, but it wasn't until later, really, when I was like probably around, 12, 13, is when I would find books at the local library. It finally occurred to me. I was like, I can actually look for books on witchcraft.
Right.
Didn't occur to me before. I have no idea why.
Right.
But then I started finding that stuff. And, I later on, probably when I was 14, I think is when Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs came out.
I have it on my
And
shelf right behind me.
I
Like,
love
we
it.
all have that book,
It's
right?
like the best book on
Mhm,
that subject, really. I mean, say what you
mhm.
will about Scott Cunningham. I know he gets a bad rap now. A lot of
Yeah,
people, who get really into like the traditional end of things are just like, oh, he made it accessible to everybody, as if that's a bad
that's
thing.
not a bad
Yes, he
thing.
made it accessible to everybody. And guess what, people? You're all here because of that. So
That's right.
don't give me that guff.
That's right.
I think he did a tremendous service to the craft, and anybody who feels differently can come and fight me.
I agree with you 100%. I feel like the Cunningham books, and one of my very first books was Cunningham's Encyclopedia, Wicca in the Kitchen. And I was like,
Mm,
it was probably my second or my third kitchen witchy book. And I was like, oh, look, easy reference. Yeah, this is accessible.
yeah,
And that gave you the tools as a young witchlet to, that's the term I like to use, to really go, oh, okay, well, let me learn the vocabulary of
yeah,
witchcraft is what it allows you to do. I love those reference books, whether it's Cunningham or others. I've got a couple of other books like that where it's quick reference because it gives you the vocabulary to create your own stories through
yeah,
witchcraft, for lack of a better analogy.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's
So
amazing.
I found that in the library. It was in the reference section because of course people would steal the witchcraft books. And so I
Right.
could only go there and visit it. But then I was taking notes, in my little 3-ring binder and, all the stuff. And then I found Janet and Stuart Farrar's A Witch's Bible Complete, which of course that's the American version of two books
Right.
lumped together. And it's very British and very dry, but I got through it. And I'm very happy to have it on my bookshelf, today. It really is, if nothing else, it's such a snapshot of craft history. And of course, then I've read everything by Doreen Valiente, the mother of modern witchcraft. Thank you very much. I always tell people, if you're not familiar with Doreen Valiente, you really need to be.
Mhm.
Just a really brilliant woman. She was amazing, and
Isn't it
we owe her a
she is
tremendous debt.
isn't it she that the famous quote being all acts of love and pleasure are my rituals? Wasn't that one of
Yeah,
hers?
she wrote the Charge of the Goddess,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so for many years, I know a lot of witches didn't know that she actually wrote this. A lot of people, growing up, I remember like Z Budapest, said in one of her books, "Oh, this is an ancient bit of craft poetry, that has survived, whatever."
Right.
And I'm
And
like,
you're like, no, it's
it's
not.
actually Doreen Valiente did it, but
Right. Right.
and she took older things, like there's some stuff from Leland Zaradia,
Hmm.
that Doreen used as kind of like a template, for
Hmm.
part of it, and
Sure.
whatever. So it has that kind of ancient, feel to it. But she was just really good at what she did. She
Right.
was, Gardner's first high priestess,
Right.
and she recognized the stuff that shouldn't have been there. She's like, wait a minute, this is from Aleister Crowley,
Right.
and oh no, well, yes, I had to use that because it's fragmentary and blah blah blah. She's like, okay, right on. Okay, I'm going to rewrite that now.
So how old were you about this time where you're discovering all of these books and going to the library and keeping your notes? And I
So
imagine
about
that 3-ring binder then became your like 15-year-old self's book of shadows.
Right, pretty much it was.
Yeah.
So it was, I started about 13, but it was about 14 when I found Cunningham's book. And then later that year is when I performed a dedication of
Mm.
myself to the craft. Just, I based it on little things that I had read, but a lot of intuition. I wrote my own ritual. At the time, I was really focused on the goddess Diana. I was really into the idea of like goddess of the moon. I still have a great relationship with Diana today. Part of that ritual was I cut an apple in half to reveal the star.
Yes.
And I ate half the apple, and then I buried the other half as an offering. And I still have the apple core with the star. I dried it, and it's actually in a deer hide little pouch and here in my temple.
So
And
special.
so, but that's when I consider that I first became a witch, became a warlock. And I do use the term warlock, and that sometimes that gets me some flack on the internet, but
Yeah,
that's fine.
it's kind of unusual. Most people don't. Can you explain why, for our listeners, why you choose that term to identify with that, and how it's different, so people that have questions can understand, like, why do you use the term warlock as opposed to witch,
Oh
and
yeah,
how is
of
that
course.
different for you?
I'm always happy to talk about it. First of all, there's many reasons why I use it, but the first reason I want to say is because the dictionary definition of warlock is a male witch, full stop. And so a lot of pagan people, not non-pagans, but pagan people will come to me and say, well, you shouldn't be calling yourself that because don't you know it means oath breaker? And so now we have to have a little lesson on how language works, So what they actually mean, because it doesn't mean oath breaker. It did mean oath breaker, probably about 14th century when the word came into usage. It's actually a Scottish word. And at that time, that was firmly Christian era. And so when they're talking about breaking an oath or the breaker of a covenant, whose oaths, whose covenants do you think are being broken? It's to the church.
Ones? Yeah,
exactly. And so if you broke the covenant, if you went outside the bounds of what was expected to you in the Christian church, then you were a warlock. And it was a term that was specifically applied to men. And so, and I address a little bit of this in the Satyr's Kiss, but which is my latest book. Thank you very much. Whoop, there it is. Yay. I love that cover. They did such a good job.
It's so thick. Sorry, I'm sorry. Was that too much?
Oh my goodness.
It's so thick and juicy.
It's a chunky boy.
It's chunky.
So, but my thought on this was, okay, it was used as an insult, right? Kind of like witch was used as an insult, but it was specifically applied to men. Right. And so that really also made me feel like, I think there's some misogyny tied up in this.
Oh, hell yeah.
Because what they're doing is they're saying, first of all, witchcraft is a feminine art that was believed at the time that women were more susceptible to witchcraft than men because women were more sexually excitable, which is so funny because in today's world, we say, we tend to think of like men as being the ones who are like, the horn dogs and out there and being ridiculous. And that's usually how it goes. But back then it was like, oh no,
50,
men
50,
are
50.
I hear you. It's actually just
I know
people.
A lot of very thirsty women. So.
It's actually people, but I'm talking about like the societal expectation, whatever. And so back in the day, it was like, oh, these women, we have to protect them from themselves and their own, lusty desires. And so then you call a man a warlock and saying he's practicing witchcraft. You're also saying that like, oh, he has fallen into this womanly art. And so to me, it also seems like, oh, this is an insult because you're trying to feminize or you're trying to emasculate, someone. Now, there isn't necessarily, I haven't seen any evidence of this, and so this is really just my own take. It's my own like gnosis, on this.
Yeah.
But I would hope that somebody would research this and look into it who is much more of an academic than I am, because I'm not. But I feel like there's something there about that. But even if you take that out of the equation, the word just means male witch. In Scotland, where the word came from, it meant a male witch. It's meant that for 500 years consistently.
Right.
Now you can say a previous meaning or a previous etymon of the word meant liar, deceiver, oathbreaker, and that's true. But plenty of words mean something totally different now. One of the best examples I can give, well, a couple. One, the word girl. Girl, now we're like, okay, it is, a female child, it used to mean a child of either sex. The word brave used to mean cowardice.
I did not know that.
And so now it's totally opposite, right? So that happens all the time. Wow. So there's this whole thing called an etymological fallacy. And that is when someone declares that a word's previous etymon, a previous definition, has any bearing on its current definition. It just doesn't. Right. That's just not how language works. So when pagans tell me, oh, the word means oathbreaker, well, you're wrong. It doesn't mean that, actually. Do some research.
It may have at one point in this particular sliver of time and
in this
space,
setting and context.
In this context, but today it doesn't. And I think and so much of especially your book, The Witch's Name, right? And what you're talking about is identity, right?
Right.
You identify and say, I'm a warlock. Now, I say publicly, I'm the kitchen witch, I'm a witch, because that's an easier swallow for people. They understand that. But when I'm speaking to another pagan, I'm pagan because I don't just practice Wicca or witchcraft. I deal with all kinds of gods. They deal with all kinds of pantheons. So I identify as pagan. So what you're talking about in terms of the word warlock is about identity and who you are and how you move through the world using particular words to describe yourself. And I'm sorry, but everyone can fuck all if they don't like the way you identify. Okay.
Well, and it is the same idea that, I was talking recently that another reason that I choose warlock is because I get a little sense of something you might call gender euphoria, when I use the word to describe myself. And you have to know a little bit about my history. I mentioned growing up in the 70s. So when it was very apparent that I was a queer boy, and everybody knew it but me, growing up, from kindergarten forward.
Right.
And I was always asked every day in school up through third grade, I was asked if I was a boy or a girl. And now I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. At the time, didn't feel so awesome, right?
No.
You're trying to fit in. And so, but I was told, especially after I came out when I was 17, and the wisdom at the time was that, well, you're not a real man. You'll never be a real man, because a real man is, cisgendered, heterosexual, exactly, all those things.
Right.
And with no emotion, and the whole
the bullshit, right? And just like you
exactly.
said, that misogyny, people think that misogyny only affects how women are viewed or the way women are treated, but as we have learned, especially in the last decade, more publicly, that we've learned, misogyny affects everyone negatively. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help cisgender heterosexual men either. It doesn't help them either. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I didn't mean to. I got
no. I was cutting you off. There's very few winners in patriarchy. If you're not up at the very top echelon, right, then you're doomed.
Correct.
And so it's just, people need to realize that hey, you're still being manipulated. Even some white straight males, are still being manipulated by the system, being told that they have to be a certain way. Maybe they'd be nicer people if they were allowed to actually just be who they actually are on the inside.
Sad. It's sad. Because I love men. I love men. I'm generally just a people lover, but like we were talking about cisgendered white heterosexual men. My experience is personally, my partner, and he's amazing. And my father was amazing, and I know men that would flourish more in their lives who are cisgendered white heterosexual men, right, who would flourish more if they were given the opportunity to breathe into emotion and breathe into spirit and be allowed by society to be who they really are, instead of what society says they have to be.
Right. A lot of that really, I think, was thrust on us in the 50s, as late as the 50s, really, because prior to that, men were it was culturally accepted for men to like touch each other and hug and things like that. Yes. And then sometime in the 50s onward, it was like, no homo. Right. Whatever, you can't hug, you can't touch. Right. The only physical contact that is acceptable between men is aggression and fighting.
So stupid.
And it's stupid, and it's poisonous.
Yes. And so I would bring you back to the point of talking about the word warlock and how you get gender euphoria from that, because it is a very masculine word. And I'm hearing from what you're saying that this, and it's funny because that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, how did, and in what way did your journey into witchcraft in your teens impact your identity as a young man? And it seems like you figured out that you were a witch and figured out that you were a queer man at the same time. And maybe they gave you these two things, did they, I should ask, not assume, did they give you comfort and like a platform, not platform, but a support to be who you are?
Yeah, like I figured out my witchcraft identity before I figured out my sexual identity. Not much more, like I said, I was 17 when I came out, and that was pretty much, it all came to a head. And I realized, oh yes, I've always had these feelings, but I denied it. And but a few years prior is when I really came into my witch identity. But I think the witch identity did help, with my accepting my queer identity. And I'm going to circle back to that phrase from Doreen Valiente again. All acts of love and pleasure are my rituals. So saith the goddess. And so that really stuck with me because I knew what was in my heart. I knew that I was a loving person, that I love people, that I love animals, I love the earth, I love the love, I want to spread the love. And, so I knew in my heart that, I'm not this demonic creature that the church is trying to tell people, and so I didn't feel like I had to buy into that,
Right.
And then I realized that for years I had bought into it, just hearing little things. Like I know growing up, one of the little things I would hear from the news, was that, basically queer people were being fired from the US government because they were quote unquote security risks. And there was always some reason why, queer people couldn't have equality. And so I knew that was existing. And I knew that prevented me, from really realizing who I was earlier. But when I finally couldn't deny it anymore, I had a choice. I could either accept what society had been telling me and then feel bad about myself, or I could realize that society was just wrong and I needed to just be authentic. And thank God I had the presence of mind to make that choice. And I've met plenty of people that didn't have the presence of mind to make that choice, and who have lived very sad lives because they have accepted this false burden that has been placed upon them.
I think there's so much validity in what you're saying there with that false burden and, what we're brought up to believe and what society kind of puts on us. And there's so many similarities between how the church handles anyone who's different, and right. I mean, come on. And even just as simple as, well, you're a woman, so you must be dirty. You're a woman, so you must be, you can't be sexual. You can't love your body. You can't love sex. You can't love pleasure. And when you find, when you find witchcraft, you find this pagan path, and you're sort of given permission to say, well, no, you are divine and pleasure and joy and love are to be celebrated in all forms, not just this tiny little form over here that some old priest is telling you has to be, and then he's going and doing horrible things to children. So like let's
Hello.
right, like come on. So it's so wonderful that you found your path and your identity as a warlock and as a queer man, like simultaneously, almost like these things, and how did they impact or affect each other, right? Like they it's like one hand washes the other, right? Like you're going, oh, I'm learning about witchcraft, but I'm also learning about myself and my sexual identity and all that. So that's you finding yourself on this path. So then you find yourself, and then where do you go, Storm? What happens after you discover, and how do you become Storm Faerywolf from that point on?
Well, I mean, the big, I think, catalyst, besides, of course, reading every book that I could get my hands on, was that I actually joined up with a couple friends of mine, these two wonderful, at the time, young women who were also very interested in witchcraft and very, very open-minded. And we formed our first coven. And we didn't necessarily base it on anyone's rules. I mean, I read every book I could get my hands on, but I didn't treat any of them like a Bible.
Right.
Even like A Witch's Bible Complete, which I know was not the author's choice of titles for that. That was an American publisher thing, but I just took everything as a suggestion because there was enough variance in what people were writing about and what they were talking about. And so I figured I'm going to take it all as inspiration, and then we're just going to go with it. And the big thing was actually doing ritual together and going into trance and having some pretty profound psychic experiences in this shared group. And we all, I think the three of us were really able to feed into each other and kind of bring about this psychic opening. And it was a really transformative time for me. And I was basically kind of saw as the one who had all the lore, because nobody else was reading all the books. They were
Right.
saying, Storm, what's up with you? And what are you reading now? What's going on? Let's try this. And so, and it just became part of my identity. And then, of course, I really loved it. It was also a way to be a little bit more protected, because if I was just a gay man, people might then want to target you. But if I was also a witch, then maybe they're going to leave you alone, and that I found to be true. If they only perceived me as a gay man, then I could be a target. But if they knew I practiced witchcraft, they were probably more likely to leave me alone, give me some space, because they were afraid I might throw a curse on them.
I mean, we don't do that. No. We don't. It's a tiny little curse.
I hardly ever do it. It's in my back pocket.
It's not a curse, it's a mirror spell.
There you go. Oh my
You're
God.
just gonna
talk about mirror boxes.
Just mirror box it, right? Okay, so at what point, because you do a lot of fairy work, a lot of fairy magic. I mean, your name is Faerywolf. So at what point during this journey do you really start working with the fae?
So
and how did that happen? Like, was there this thing, boom, oh my God, you're in trance and all of a sudden you're dealing with fairies, or No,
it was one of those things where it was kind of a multi-pronged approach. One was on the conscious level. It was reading Starhawk's book, The Spiral Dance, and she mentions Victor Anderson, the founder of the fairy tradition. She mentions one of the gods, the blue god, Gianni Glass. He was the laughing god of love. And there was something about that I was hooked on. It was like this musical note that I hadn't heard since I was a kid, is what it felt like. Like what's going on here? Talked a little bit about the ancient Pictish people. And I was like, there's something, I don't know, in my blood. And I was always raised to be very proud of our Irish American heritage. My mother is almost full Irish. My family on my mother's side came over from Ireland. My grandfather is from Ireland. And so I was always raised.
That's legit.
I mean, it's a big thing. And I mean, I grew up in Dublin, California.
Oh no, really?
Right. And so of course that was all decked out with the, shamrocks and the whole thing. And I lived there before it became a city. I was actually in the parade. I think it was 9 years old. I was in the parade when Dublin, California became its own city.
Wow.
And so weird. But so it was always there, like the idea. And I was, before I shaved my head, redhead. I was a redhead, and it was like I was the only redhead in my school for a long time, which was the weirdest thing too. Right. So that's how everybody knew me. That was one of the reasons I started shaving my head, by the way. I was just like, because everyone always identified me with it, and I was like, now it's gone. What happens now? Right. But and now it's just, I am not patient enough to let it grow back in, and I don't know what it would be like now. But anyway, whole other story. So I don't know. I just always was very proud of our Irish roots. And I was raised with stories of the little people. And when the wind would howl, my mom would shiver, and she'd talk about how when she was a little girl, her father would tell her about the banshee. And so all that stuff was always in the back of my mind. Right. Wow. And honestly, I know this is so cheesy, but give it to us. When I was a little kid, literally it was like a religious experience for us. Every St. Patrick's Day was like almost like second Christmas in our house. And we had the ritual watching of the Disney movie Darby O'Gill.
And the little people. Yes. Sean Connery. Oh my God. Sean, beautiful Sean Connery.
That could spark a whole other conversation.
We'll get into that later.
But so that was always part of it. Right. And I always had these experiences. I was always a very, as they would say, he was an imaginative child. And I was always seeing little beings and, whatever. And I was a very active dreamer and daydreamer. But it wasn't until I found the fairy witchcraft tradition that I started to make some connections with my childhood. So when I was doing this rather lengthy training to get initiated into the fairy tradition, I would have these experiences where I was like, wait a minute, but I remember this feeling from when I was
Oh,
6, and I haven't thought about it in forever. And then I'd remember these dreams and these beings that I would talk to. And so in hindsight, I've always been surrounded by them, but I didn't know.
of course.
It was totally just like, oh, that's just life. And I was
Mhm.
always looking for, I wanted like the big psychic experience. And yet here I was in hindsight, I was having them all the time, but I didn't recognize it because that was just life. Right.
Right,
And that's so
right.
American in my mind. It's like, we're looking for the big, loud explosions, and we're
Mhm.
not paying attention to what's just right there in front of you. What's
Right,
just be quiet for a second. Just be quiet.
right, right. And
So,
working with
but
fairies is so, you really need to be an observer, at least in my
yeah,
experience. And obviously, I don't have as much knowledge and experience as you do, but I have done a bit of fairy work, and in my experience, it's really about observing. And they're there. They're just there. You just
yeah,
have to know and look and open your eyes and welcome. Um, and they're just there. There isn't a big light bulb moment. It's constant. It's
no.
it's the
And the
weather,
fact that
you
we're
know.
looking for that big light bulb moment, I often will talk to my students about it and say, oh, we're looking for the spiritual fireworks, but that's actually distracting. When we have like the big epiphany, when we do something new, sure, that's great and it can be validating, but if we're
Mhm.
always looking for that, then that means we're actually missing what's right in front of us.
A
And so
hundred
much of
percent.
this work is about quieting down, getting still, just observing, and seeing what is going to arise. And in terms of working with like fairy beings, they are so many and varied. And in fact, when I was researching for my first Llewellyn book, Betwixt and Between, which is like an introduction to the fairy witchcraft tradition, I was really reminded of some of the trance experiences that I did as part of my training, which was like,
Wow.
go out into the woods and just before sunset, and just sit there and don't talk and don't have anybody with you, and let the sun set, and just be
Mhm.
observant of the world around you as the sun sets and goes beneath the horizon. So
Mhm.
your consciousness will also set, and you'll shift into that more open space.
Mhm.
But you recognize it's all around us. And
Mhm.
also, when we're talking about fairy beings, it's not just these little beings from Ireland and Wales, they're the
No.
world over. And really, the original word fairy didn't refer to a race of people, and it didn't refer to a specific place. It referred to things of magic and enchantment, like just in general. So any
Yes.
otherworldly magical encounter you're having is a fairy encounter.
Yeah.
And that
I
is so wrapped up with the history of witchcraft too. You
yeah.
often find like Diana, the goddess Diana, is the queen of witches and fairies.
Mhm.
And you find that a lot. You can't separate witchcraft from fairy, because it is about
Right.
working with the other world, the hidden knowledge and hidden consciousness of nature.
Right, right. That and that's how I've always identified Fae, is the natural world, right? Whether it is, if I just put a deck on my house and I put big pots of sunflowers out there. And recently we have had yellow golden finches coming and sitting on top of our sunflowers and just hanging out. And I'm like, the fairies are here. Like the nature, the animals, the insects, the water, like it's all, for me anyway, my interpretation of fae is nature spirits, and how they, and it's not just that, right? But that's how I am able to connect with them.
Right, right, right.
Right? That's how I'm
Yes.
able to connect with them. And when these creatures and these energies show themselves to us, that's where the observation and the awareness comes in, to be like, it's not just a bird, right? Like they don't need to come here. There's no reason. There's woods everywhere, there's food everywhere, there's no reason why they need to be here. There isn't. Why are they here? What are they trying to teach me? What are they trying to say? I should appreciate the presence of whatever it is that I'm experiencing here, and take those minutes and observe, right?
Yeah. It's so
Right?
amazing when, we in our human dwelling spaces, when we do have those natural encounters, and I mean, I'm not here to say like, oh, it's all an omen or, whatever. I mean, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes a bird is just a bird, but I do think it is in how we feel about it in the moment. And so when you are observing that, you have the birds on your sunflowers and you're like, oh, this is a special thing, and you enter into that sacred space within yourself, right? That sacred space within yourself that opens you up to the sacred all around you. And I feel that way, even when it's something scary, like a couple of times we've had a hawk, which I didn't even think about. I live in the suburbs. I've never thought of hawks, but we had a hawk come down into our yard a couple of times.
Gotta watch those puppies.
I know. I didn't even think about the puppies. We had a cage with a couple doves that were being relocated, and in that brief time, the hawk came down and slaughtered them, and it was like traumatic.
Yes.
But I was like, whoa, this is like feels like the war goddess, whatever. It was like, it was brutal. And I was like, I'm in the suburbs. I just wouldn't have thought about it, whatever.
Right.
But we have a lot of wildlife that comes and visits our little suburban backyard. And of course we have a lot of food for them. We have a lot of we have grapevines and fruit trees. And also we have 4 sequoias in our backyard.
Wow.
Our backyard is like a little forest. And if you're walking on the street behind us, we don't have a house behind us, but if you're walking on the street, and you see everybody else's fences, in their backyards, whatever, and maybe they have 1 or 2 trees, and then ours is like just a box of trees. It's a forest.
Love you're creating a space to welcome these energies in.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what it is. And no wonder you're seeing all of these amazing things, right? I mean, that's magic in itself.
It is, and it does feel magical, to have this space and kind of be a steward of that space and to be able to provide. I had posted a picture on Instagram the other day of a bunch of grapes that's hanging from one of our vines. And somebody asked me, oh, are you going to make wine? And I'm like, we've never actually gotten grapes for ourselves because the birds and the squirrels always get them first. Mm-hmm. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay feeding the natural wildlife. I love that if nothing else, I can provide, this space for that to happen, because to me, that is magical.
Absolutely.
And it gives me that opportunity to connect with nature, and then I don't have to go anywhere. I'm stuck here anyway, so
I love it.
Bring it to me.
Storm, on that note, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to hear from our sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to talk all about Satyr's Kiss and Witch's Name. If we have time, talk about Witch's Name, but definitely want to talk about Satyr's Kiss. So we'll be right back with more of the amazing Storm Faerywolf. And we are back with the incredible Storm Faerywolf, who is really now my new best friend. We're having better, I feel bad for the people listening, because we're having a better time when we're on the breaks than we are, and we're having a great time on the pod, but on the breaks, I'm having so much fun with you. We were just talking about losing weight and body image issues, but we have so many other things to talk about. Storm, we have to talk about this book, Satyr's Kiss.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Okay. We have to talk about this. So the subheading on the Satyr's Kiss is Queer Men, Sex Magic, and Modern Witchcraft. Now I'm going to put this out there for those of you that don't know. I'm not a queer man. Surprised. No, I'm not a queer man. I'm a slightly queer woman. But this book is hot.
Thank you.
It's hot. There's a lot of stuff in here. And I think that this is important because I am not a queer man. And yet I have found things in this book that I think are really important. You have a whole chapter about having sex with spirit, which I think is really interesting. And I definitely took it to heart. And then you do talk a lot about sex magic and that sort of thing. So even if you're not a queer man, you can read this book, you can enjoy this book, you can get a lot out of it. Am I correct?
Thank you. I was very hopeful that would be the case, and especially because before it came out, when we're doing all the publicity and I'm talking about it, sure, queer men were like, oh, I can't wait for this, blah, blah, blah. But mostly I heard from women. Mm-hmm. Mostly women were like, I can't wait for this book. This is awesome. And I was a little trepidatious. I'm like, I love that. However, I don't want you to be disappointed because it is written for queer men in mind, because I'm a queer man. I'm a gay man. And that's what I know about. is my little, not that I can speak for all queer men, but that's what I know about. And so that's what I wanted to put forward. But I was hopeful that other people would be able to find stuff in it because, when it comes down to it, we're not all that different. We have some different interests, we've got some different cultural things, but we're all people, and I think that if nothing else, we can all learn something about other people and how, people might be doing things differently. So for you to say that you have found it useful, that you've been able to get stuff out of it, I love that. Thank you so much. That really means the world to me.
Thank you. And the exact words I used were, it's hot.
I didn't want to shy away
hot.
from, it's a good, and it's not all sex magic, but as you know, there's a good chunk of sex magic in there, because I feel like that is the thing that often gets glossed over, especially when we're talking about queer men, because that is still such a threat to society. Queer male sex is still seen as something that's dirty, that's something that's deviant, that's something that's wrong. And so I wanted to really put it out there in a way that was exploring the spirituality of it, but not make it so spiritual that it was disconnected from the body and disconnected from the hotness. Because I feel like if sex is hot, hot sex is great. And also hot sex, that's some hot spirituality right there.
Absolutely.
And they're not mutually exclusive. And yet societally, I feel like that often gets played that way, that it is exclusive. If you're having spiritual sex, it must be transcendent and it's white light. And maybe your bodies aren't even touching, whatever, it's like, we're just going to have transcendental sex.
But you can have that as well. I think that one of the things that's really important to remember when you're talking about any kind of sex magic is that, first of all, it's individual, right? It's for you and whoever you're experiencing with, between consenting partners. And that's the first and foremost thing. But it can be just like spirituality, whatever you want it to be.
And what does it need to be for you? Because we are all different. And when we connect to our own divine authority, and we let that power move through us, it's going to be different for each of us, and it should be different. And and we shouldn't have to give up one aspect in order to gain another. We should be able to pull these things together, as above, so below.
Yes.
And so we're going to bring those things together. And my whole thing is that it's really about achieving what I call an embodied transcendence. We do want that transcendent experience, like we're expanding and feeling the divine, but not at the expense of our body. We don't want to take the body out of the equation. The body is holy. The body is what anchors everything here in the physical world. Yes, I want to do my spiritual work and go out on the astral plane, but I'm not leaving the body behind. The body is my anchor, and the body has wisdom, and that's how I understand the wisdom of spirit is through the body.
Yeah, and the physical pleasures, pleasures being able to, hone into parts of the body, whether they're the sex organs or not. Fingertips, lips, skin, feet, whatever that is, everything connecting in the physical realm, so that you can maybe let go enough to get into the spiritual realm.
Well, I think there is a lexicon of the body that we need to learn, that spirit speaks to us through the body. We feel, I feel that in my stomach, or I feel that in my chest, or wherever it is. It doesn't have to be the sex organs, but it can, and it's really about recognizing that we are getting messages from spirit all the time, but we're getting it through the body. And so that means we have to pay attention to the body. And for a lot of us, that's not comfortable, because we might have, I know you and I were talking off camera or off recording, that we've had, some physical stuff, and so if you have any sort of like chronic condition or sensitivity, a lot of times we don't want to pay attention to the body. But I find that it's through paying more attention to the body in which I can find relief, from those symptoms as well. When I stopped denying the body and started paying attention to the body, then I started to find my path of healing.
Wow, how powerful. When ignoring the body and paying attention to the body, you found spiritual healing. It's such an important message. And I think specifically when relating to, sex magic and witchcraft, there is, we were again talking off camera about body image, how we feel about our bodies, how we feel in our bodies. It's very common to be able to say, I hate my body. I'm this, I'm that, I'm too fat, I'm too thin, I don't like this about myself. It is very uncommon for someone to say, I love my body. I love the way it makes me feel. I love the sensations my body gives me. I love the way other people appreciate my body. And I can only speak as a plus size woman from that perspective. I struggle with that and nakedness and the sacredness of nakedness. And I think a lot of people do. Is that something that you address in terms of the male body or the trans body in this book?
Yeah, so there's some exercises that I give in the book that are specifically about looking at your body and loving your body. This is some work that I have worked with for years in the context of the fairy tradition. And there's a particular exercise often called the shadow lover, in which we will stand naked in front of a full-length mirror. And that is the catalyst for this deeper work. And that is the most difficult part for most people. And especially in my experience for queer men, even more than women, at least in my experience, in my, batch of students that I've had over the years. Because I think women are more accustomed to having to confront it, because that's such a big thing in society of, paying attention to the body, and they've already embodied that hatred of the body, but there's already been a backlash, for that with women. And so I think women are more equipped, to addressing those issues.
And we talk about it.
Because you talk, because it's something that people talk about. But with queer men, it hasn't been talked about as much.
Right.
And so a lot of my queer male students, when we get to this, they're like, oh my God, I can't even do this. Right. Because everybody wants to hold in their stomach, and it's like, no, let it all hang out. Don't make any excuses. There's no apologies. Just look, this is who you are. This is your body. And you need to reframe it. You might look at it and be like, oh, I see these stretch marks, and oh, this is sagging here, and oh, I wish, I could see my abs, or, whatever the thing is, right? And we want to reframe it. No, this is your sacred body. And yeah, sure, we could all be healthier, but this isn't about creating like a body so that other people can be attracted to it. I mean, if that happens, that's great. If you want to do that, that's great too. But first and foremost, the core needs to be health and loving yourself. And so that exercise of standing in front of that full-length mirror, and then maybe it becomes a masturbatory rite as well. And that's another thing that can cause people a lot of issues, because it's like, oh, I don't want to look at myself, but we can get through that, and we can learn to actually love ourselves, and we can learn to find ourselves as attractive. And I think that's so necessary. We need to recognize that we are attractive. The most attractive thing is just feeling attractive and feeling good about yourself. And I have noticed in my life that in those times that for whatever reason, I felt better about myself, maybe I, wrote a book, or maybe I did this thing, and I was successful at something. It doesn't all have to be about losing weight. I just felt good. And when I feel good, then people are attracted to that. You become attractive.
It's not about the body at all. It's about the body is the housing of the spirit and the emotion and the soul. And when you are at peace with who you are on the inside, and you accept who you are on the outside, other people come to your vibration, right? You're
Yeah.
vibrating at the same level.
Yeah.
So if you are constantly going, oh, well, I'm a really good person, I have such a pretty face, I'm really nice, I'm good with animals, but I'm a giant fat ass, people aren't going to see all the beautiful things because you're putting up that wall because you are the one obsessed.
Yeah. And
with
you're
how
not,
you look.
and you're not seeing it because you put up that wall internally.
Right.
You know, but if we're just focusing on, I just feel really good about myself. You know, I did this thing, I was successful, I met a goal, you know, whatever. And we can just focus on that good stuff. And then I noticed those were the times in which then my body would fall more in line with health and what I consider to be attractive. So it was easier for me to lose the weight that I needed to lose, not because I wanted to lose weight necessarily to look better, although that was a fringe benefit. I lost weight originally because I had no energy and I just felt like a slug in my body, you know, and I realized I was too young to feel that old. And so, but then when I shifted internally, that's when it became easier for me to actually lose weight. I had energy to exercise, you know, so it's all wrapped up in, you know, human beings. It's so easy for us to fall into depression and not even know it. And a lot of it is self-worth. And so a lot of the work in the Satyr's Kiss, at least in the beginning part of the sex magic, is about self-acceptance and accepting the body, because this is who you are. You know, you are not separate from your body.
No.
You know, your body is you. You're more than your body.
Yeah.
But don't deny your body. We have to pay attention to the body. We have to embrace the body. We have to love the body. And the minute we love the body will start to love us back.
I think it's so important that sentiment, the minute we love the body will love us back. And I would like to be clear and clarify that when we're talking about health and wellness and weight, it is not about you must be skinny or you must be this or you must be that.
God,
some people have physical limitations and maybe you can't exercise, or maybe you know, maybe you are missing a limb and maybe you have this condition or that condition. It's not about trying to fix what's wrong, quote unquote. It's about, and it's also not about saying, well, I am this way and so I give up on my physical health. It's about meeting yourself where you are at this moment and learning to fall in love with who you are that happens to be in the package that you're in.
Right. Exactly. And everybody is different. It's not about, you know, literally one size does not fit all, you know, and so this isn't about, oh, if you're skinny, you're going to have more energy. Well, maybe no, maybe you're too, you know, I got to a point where I was too skinny and then I didn't have energy. I couldn't stand up without feeling like I was going to fall over because I lost so much weight.
Right. Or maybe you're skinny because you're sick. Right. Some people, I know some people that have celiac that were like really, really, really sick and they were so skinny and everybody's like, oh, you're so thin and you look so good. And then the minute they figured out that they had a dietary problem, they were able to eat in a way that their body was then able to maintain nutrients and they put on weight as opposed to getting off weight. And now
and that's more healthy.
Correct. So like, take what we're saying, people who are listening, take what we're saying and apply it to your own physical health.
Exactly. It's about health. It's not about fitting any sort of like societal standard in order to, you know, be appreciated aesthetically from anybody else. You know, I think we all need to take, I mentioned off camera, you know, praise to the goddess Lizzo. You know, I think one of the biggest contributions she's made for all of us is just she accepts herself who she is. And she is damn sexy. And she's breaking the mold. She's like showing people that like sexy comes in all sizes.
Have you watched
it? And that's absolutely true. Sexy comes in all sizes.
Sexy comes in all sizes. Have you watched Lizzo's show?
No, I haven't.
Watch it. It's on HBO. It's called Watch Out for the Big Girls. And we watched it because my partner loves big girls. And he was
I didn't even know she had a show. Oh my God, that's
like,
awesome.
He's like, can we watch it? And I'm like, hell yeah, you want to watch big girls jiggle and dance? Absolutely. So what she did was she put together like a reality show to audition backup dancers, right? And she brought all these amazing women on, all big girls. And she like, it's like 10 episodes of them going through an audition process to then go on, sorry, I just hit my microphone, to then go on the road with her. And the way she interacts with them, the way she lifts them up, the way she's like, you're all fucking gorgeous. And she makes them take a sensual movements class to do exactly what you're talking about in your book. Get comfortable with your body, feel your body, touch yourself. What does your skin feel like? What does your stomach feel like? I mean, like I said, I'm a big girl. I don't let people touch my stomach. Like that was when, that's a really hard, uncomfortable thing for me. So like in doing that work of standing in front of the mirror, like touching the parts of yourself that maybe you don't like, and telling those parts, I love you too.
I love you. Exactly.
I love you too. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for this belly because it laughs and jiggles when I'm happy, you know, like things like that. Like you don't think about them, you know? Okay, so tell me, in writing The Satyr's Kiss, is there any kind of common misconceptions around the work that you've done in this particular book that you'd want to debunk?
So I think so. There just recently, this is where I get to talk about this funny stuff. So just recently I got a 1-star review, you know, for it on Amazon. And that's fine. You know, obviously my work's not going to be for everybody. And I get that, you know, witchcraft isn't for everybody. And then you get into these little niches of that, these subgenres. So I get that. But the person seemed to be really offended at all the sex stuff. And one of the things that he talked about was that, oh, an initiation is a beautiful thing. It doesn't need to have sex brought into it. And I'm kind of paraphrasing. I don't remember what he said. But I was really left with this idea that like, oh, wow, he feels that like bringing sex into our spiritual practice is something tawdry, is something dirty, is something wrong. And of course, I feel the opposite, you know, but what I've really noticed, even among some queer men, there's this idea that like, oh, if you enjoy sex and you want to have a lot of sex, then there must be something wrong with you. You know, you're just promiscuous, you know.
I mean, you might be promiscuous, but that has nothing to do with the fact that you enjoy sex.
Right. And the fact that, you know, sex is healthy, you know, and, you know, as long as we're, you know, being smart about it, and it's between consenting legal adults. You know, enthusiastic consent is something I definitely talk about in the book. Enthusiastic
consent, yes.
You know, so I think to me, it's a beautiful thing. You know, bringing in sex into our spirituality is a beautiful thing. Does that mean that that's all I do? No, absolutely not. This is like an aside. This is something that we can do when we want to, when we feel it's appropriate. So in the book, I talk about certain rituals being red rites, meaning that they are sexually charged, or blue rites, meaning they are not sexually charged. And so I try to give both versions for a lot of the spells and the rituals that are in there, because I recognize, yeah, you might want to bring in sex magic into your practice, but maybe you don't want to bring it into every single aspect. But if you do, here's how you can. And here you have choices, you know, that's what it's about. But this person seemed to think that because I was including sex magic, that meant that it's just all sex all the time, or maybe I'm going to have sex with anything that moves, or, you know, whatever. And even if I was, there's nothing wrong with that. Again, if it is enthusiastic consent with legal adults, and that's what you want to do,
and you're not hurting anybody.
Exactly.
Right. Like I feel very much like the way that we should, quotation marks, the way that we should feel about sex, sexual identity, gender identity, sexual preferences is the same way we should feel about religion and spirituality. It's none of my fucking business what you do in your own home.
Right. Exactly.
You're not hurting, both of those things. You're not hurting anyone. You're putting good out into the world. You're whatever you like, however you want to practice, you practice. Like how is that? Does that have anything to do with anybody else? Right.
Well, I think that, so something like this, when you touch upon such an obvious, strong reaction, you know, because that seemed to be overly strong of a reaction compared to what he was actually reading in my book. And I think there was a lot of projection there. But I think it does, especially in the queer world, I think there's a lot of internalized homophobia, you know, that is going on. And so there's a lot of queer men that really want to put it out there. They're like, oh, I'm not like those other gays. You know, I'm not watching Drag Race, and I'm not, you know, going to the clubs, and I'm not doing this, and, you know, whatever. And so maybe they're like log cabin Republicans or something, which I don't understand, but whatever. You know, and so that's really what I got from this. What, you know, because he was talking about, oh, well, it's just a bunch of gay stereotypes. Well, I do talk about gay stereotypes in the book, and I talk about how a lot of stereotypes, there's an element of truth.
Absolutely.
But these are also archetypes, and these are things that we can tap into, like the drag queen, you know, the leather daddy, the boy, the twink, you know, all of these things, the bear. These are things that are part of queer culture, and you don't have to identify with any of them, but you know what I'm talking about when I bring them up, because they're so ingrained in queer culture. And so I use these as archetypal examples of things that we could tap into in kind of like a modern mythology, you know, sort of way. Just as valid as touching in with an ancient god or goddess, because really there is no difference. I know people will get mad at me for saying that, but really, one of my goddesses that I work with semi-regularly is Wonder Woman. And she's much beloved in the queer community and beyond. And but I will fight somebody. I'm telling you, she's just as real of a goddess as the goddess Diana, as Aradia, as Hecate, as the Morrigan, whatever. She's just as real. And in fact, we have more stories about Wonder Woman now than we do about any of those. You know, and so it's just how divinity expresses itself in this myriad of forms, constantly changing and redefining and representing itself over and over and over. So the same thing is with the archetype of the drag queen, you know, or the twink. These are things that we might be able to tap into on a spiritual level and recognize how these are spiritual forces that have been playing out in the queer community since the queer community began and will continue to play out. We will get new forms as we move into the future, and people redefine gender identity and sexual orientation and all these things. It's fluid. It will change forms. And so we're going to find some other things in there too. But I think it's important that queer people recognize, hey, I don't have to be into all of it, but it is part of our shared culture and it is part of our history.
Yeah. And there's so much to, I mean, there's so many points to everything that you just said, but it is fluid. Sexuality is fluid and gender identity is fluid. And if you had asked me in my 20s, I would have said I'm a bisexual woman 50-50, right? And in my 40s, I'm like 30-70 now, right? Like that's, do you know what I mean? Like it's changed for me over time. It changes over time, you know, and these archetypes that you're talking about, that you talk about the drag queen and the bear, and, you know, even as someone who is not a queer man, I can say, oh, I mean, I worship RuPaul. I don't know if anybody else, like I worship RuPaul. She's amazing. She gives me confidence. She embodies something that I want to be closer to, the way Wonder Woman might embody a certain type of strength and fortitude that you want to be closer to.
Absolutely.
Right. And all of that is on the table for witches. Right.
Yeah.
It's all on the table for witches. And I think that's something that this book kind of brings into focus, where you might not have thought of those things before. What do you hope someone would get out of this? You know, your typical reader, your ideal reader, what do you hope they walk away from after reading Satyr's Kiss?
I'm really hoping that people will be able to recognize that they don't necessarily have to follow a perfectly established pattern in terms of their witchcraft and their spirituality. That it is personal. And so throughout that book, I talk about the creation of what I call a queer craft, not the queer craft, but a queer craft. And I think the distinction is important because it is about what speaks to you. And so I'm giving all these examples. I have a section where I talk about different, gods and goddesses and mythologies that are queer oriented, or we can see queerness in them. But I'm not saying these are the gods that you need to work with. I'm saying take inspiration from this and take inspiration from everything in your life. Take inspiration from queerness. So I also talk about queer figures from history who were not witches, who were not warlocks, but who played an extraordinary role in the development of our collective queer consciousness and our emergent queer culture. People like Alan Turing, who was, in England, and during World War II, he was instrumental in breaking the Nazis' code, helped end the war. And then as soon as the war was won, they arrested him for the crime of homosexuality, and they chemically castrated him. And he committed suicide 2 years later. And there's so many queer figures that we owe a great debt to, who maybe like Alan Turing are now being recognized, but there's so many more that are just forgotten. And I think it's important when we can to recognize these are our queer ancestors, whom I call the rainbow dead. And so I think it's important to incorporate them into our spirituality. So I have, as part of a suggestion for a ritual, we would invoke the rainbow dead. We might face the direction of Stonewall.
I love it.
Stonewall, New York, where the riots started, which really was the catalyst here in the United States and all over the globe for the queer rights movement. So we're going to face the direction of Stonewall just to recognize that that's part of our history, and that we still take collective inspiration from that. And we're no longer, I don't want people to feel like they have to be guests in somebody else's spiritual home. A lot of witchcraft, modern witchcraft, still has that gender binary kind of male female polarity thing. And that's one of the things I tackle early on in the book, is this idea that no, sexual polarity, maybe we could let that go now. This idea of the hermetic principle of gender. Well, I think that's been misunderstood, because we have a better understanding of human gender now. It's fluid, it's a spectrum. And spirit is even more fluid, even more of a spectrum than we are here. So I think we need to recognize there are alternatives, and we don't have to be, again, a guest in somebody else's spiritual home. We can make our own. And so queer craft would be a craft that centers the queer experience, whether it's sexual, cultural, historical. We make that the center because we need to be the centers of our own spiritual lives. And that doesn't mean we're selfish. That means we're going to be centered within ourselves. And then when we're centered and empowered, then we can extend those hands of community, of network, of caring to other people. But it's kind of like when you're on that plane, the mask comes down, you do your own first, and then you help the kid next to you.
Absolutely.
We have to fill our own chalice. We have to fill our own hearts, our own spirits. We have to make sure that we're nourished, and establishing a queer craft that centers queer experience in our spirituality is one step toward making that happen.
That is so important and so poignant. And I have to thank you for all of that. You're creating that space for the entire LGBTQ plus community, plus, all the witchcraft community. And that's one of the things that this book, I think, really does for anyone who feels like if you feel like you might be part of the queer community, you can read this book. You don't have to be a specifically homosexual man. If you're anywhere in there, you can get a lot out of Satyr's Kiss. We didn't really have time to talk about Witch's Name, so we're going to have you back on to talk about that, or whatever else you're doing in the next few months, because we do have to wrap it up. But literally, Storm, I could talk to you forever.
I feel the same. This has been awesome. Thank you.
Yay! Oh, hooray! Fantastic. I'm so happy. Okay, so Storm, tell everyone where they can find you online, how to buy your book. How do we stalk you? I know how to stalk you because I know your partners. I know all of your partners. Well, I know all but one of your partners, but I know your part. I know your life and your dogs and everything. So tell everyone else where they can find you online.
Well, first and foremost, you can find me on my website, faerywolf.com. That's Faery, wolf.com. It's A before E. There's no fear in fairy. Thank you.
Love it.
Just heading that off before it happens. But you could also find our online classes, and I say ours, so collectively, the House Four-Locks, that's myself, my husband, Chaz Bogan, and my partners, Devin Hunter and Matt Oren. We offer classes at modernwitchuniversity.com, and that is the home of Black Rose Witchcraft, which is our 1-year online course in the craft. So definitely you could check those out, but follow me on Twitter at Storm Faerywolf. You could find me on Instagram at Faerywolf, Facebook at Faerywolf. So, but yeah, just log on. You could find me. I'm pretty accessible. You could send me a message and hopefully I'll get back to you in a timely way. But definitely check out my website, and that's where you can find my books. There's links where you can get them from Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can even get signed copies from my store. And you can find that through my website, or you could go directly to my store, daturatrading.com.
Excellent. And we'll put all of your links up on the show notes, so people will be, if they can't remember all that, they can just go over the show notes and click.
Awesome.
Okay, so one last question, and this is my signature question I ask to everybody who comes on the show. As we have discussed, I am a kitchen witch. Food is my jam. If you were to have me cook you one magical meal, what would it be and why?
Ooh, I want you to make me some gluten-free pasta, because you talked about your Italian heritage, and I just saw you light up and you're talking about making pizza and pasta, and I love pasta. And so, and I know because we talked about the whole gluten-free thing, I know you'd be really good at it. So.
Oh, well, thank you. And you're also dairy-free, right? So what if we made
Yes.
like a gluten-free, dairy-free ravioli?
Oh my goodness. Oh,
Would
yes,
you
please.
die with
I would.
Are you a meat eater? Do you eat meat?
I am. Yeah.
Okay, so then I want to make you like gluten-free, dairy-free ravioli, and I would use like some sort of a tofu or cashew cheese. And then I would put on top of that like a sausage bolognese, because I want to give you that masculine energy of the sausage.
That sounds amazing.
Right? With like super fresh basil. And then I'm going to serve it with like a side of ridiculous gluten-free garlic bread. So you can dunk.
God. Girl, I am there.
Right?
I am there. You're hitting all
hot,
the notes.
Right? It's
I
hot.
love it. I love
Sexy.
it.
Well, next time you and the boys are out here, because I'm out here in New England, and I know you come out here every once in a while, you go to Salem and whatnot. So when you're here, you let me know. I will have the 4 of you over, and I will feed all of you, and it would be amazing. It would be amazing.
I'm looking forward to it. That's great.
It would be incredible.
Awesome.
I heart you so big. Thank you so much for being here. I had the best time. Thank you. And until next time, I wish you all so many blessings and so much gratitude. Thanks so much for being here.